Rick, can you tell us a little bit about the strategies that you've utilized to make your course more how you would like to teach it
Sure.
versus someone else's content?
So when I got here in the fall of 2000, I was asked to teach. At that time, the sociology and criminal justice departments were together. And I was asked to teach what was then the introduction to criminal justice class. And I'm not a criminal justice scholar. So it was an interesting time for me. I had taught criminology and criminological theory as a graduate student, but this was the first time I was teaching a room of 120, 150 students, a subject that I was, tangentially familiar with. And at that time, often when you sat in your office, representatives from the various textbook publishing companies would come by and attempt to get you to use their book. And I'm, fresh out of grad school. I hadn't really thought about this much. And a rep showed me a textbook and said, here's a textbook that corresponds to the class you're teaching. And look here, here's a teacher's manual with lecture notes that goes along to each chapter. And here are overhead transparencies that go along with these lecture notes. And here is a set of written assignments. And here is a test bank with questions. And I was like, sign me up. I was worried about papers that I had to write and things that I wanted to publish. And I had the appropriate level of tenure anxiety. And so it was, for me, I thought, this is great. I have a prepackaged class, which I began to teach. And one of the first things that I noticed, which is something that my colleague mentioned, is that every year or so, they would come out with a new edition of the book. And all they really did was sort of update the examples. It's like you're illustrating a concept with this thing that's in the news. And then 2 years later, you illustrate the exact same content with the exact same wording with a different example in the news. And I started thinking to myself, this seems to be an unreasonable money grab. And I had never really thought about how much the book cost students. People would send me, this is another, sort of thing that used to happen, is people would send me unsolicited instructor copies and have these big stacks of books. And then interestingly enough, people would come by and want to buy these, and they would give you cash for these if you would give them their. And so the first thing I have to admit, is, and maybe this is not something I should have felt, but I thought to myself, this seems kind of unseemly. I'm not really comfortable with this at all. So that's sort of from the financial, ethical side of things. I started feeling a little bit squeamish. Then, as I started to sort of find my voice in this class, and as I began to teach it regularly, I noticed that I sort of wanted to spend more time on some things and less on others than the book. And the organization of the chapters was not to my liking, and I wanted to sort of. And this happened with Sociology 101, which I was also teaching as well. And then there were just things in the book that I disagreed with. I read, their analysis of a topic and thought, no, I disagree with that. So that is when the university started to use Blackboard, and now you have a system for posting supplementary materials online. You don't have to put things on reserve at the library. You don't have to. So students had easy access. And one of the things that I had always done, just to start my day with a cup of coffee, is just read the news. And I noticed that if I have a good news aggregator app with good AI, it would sort of feed me stories that I wanted to read. Now, and sort of, it knew what I was interested in, and it knew what to give me. And now this is clearly easier for a social scientist than it would be for somebody in physics and construction. Man, for those of you who are in the humanities and social sciences, this is easy. And I just started seeing news stories and links to long form journalism and stuff that sort of illustrated things that I was interested in class, and things that I was going over. And I just sort of began to clip these things and began to assemble the links and began to provide them to provide them for students. And so slowly but surely, that kind of content crowded out the textbook. There were still some issues that I needed to cover. Like one thing that I thought the textbooks really do well is the defining of terms, and sort of succinct summaries of the sort of state of affairs within within a scholarly field. And I think we'll talk about maybe in a few minutes about how I sort of solved those kinds of problems. But for me, it just was a process, slow evolutionary process of sort of finding things and inserting things into the course materials, finding ways to illustrate concepts. You know, a nice, long, juicy piece of investigative journalism in The Atlantic is a better read than a textbook chapter 99% of the time. And all you really need to do then is to get the sort of scaffolding of terms, definitions, and things like that from the textbook, and then let the examples, you know, do the talking. And so that's how I sort of worked on making the course my own. I just slowly, through a process of evolution, let the course materials crowd out the text.
Greg, you seem to touch a little bit about the pros and cons of this strategy. Can you expand a little bit more about that?
Which pros and cons?
Of implementing OER?
Yeah, well, things have gotten easier, that's for sure. A definite con, as I said, was trying to find ways to get the definition of terms and things like that. And that had always been a problem. But these days, it's not a problem at all. Like, I mean, I hate to this year has been a complete joy for defining terms and supplementing textbooks, because Chat GPT is my buddy. And so today, for instance, I was like, okay, you know, to demonstrate how this works, if I'm my field is the sociology of religion, and just to prepare for this, I just sat down and asked Chat GPT, what do sociologists know about the relationship between educational attainment and religiosity? Include citations to recent studies. 2 minutes. A nice little essay with current citations. And it's like, that's, you know, let Chat GPT write your textbook for you. Or I'll ask it, you know, how do sociologists use the term X, and how is it applied in this situation or that situation? And there's your content right there. Now, I could have done this myself, but something like this would have taken me, what, an hour, maybe 90 minutes. And it definitely took this AI engine, 30 seconds. Now, set aside the fact that this is incredibly scary and dystopian. In the short term, it's a tool that you can use to save time and to provide information. Now, I have played with this a lot. How many of you have played with it? I've played with it a lot. And my rule for Chat GPT is don't ever ask it anything you don't already know the answer to. You make sure you know exactly what the content should be so that you can sort of fact check what it produces. But, you know, this is, I usually just say sponsored by Chat GPT, but it's not copyrighted in any way. It does a good job. And that's, you know, going forward for young assistant professors, people that are just getting started, it's a great way to handle the problem of glossaries and terms and summarizing the state of the field on sort of this or that topic. So before, I had to do that with, news articles, or, you know, there are lots of scholars with good blogs and things like that. But now I think this AI engine has really made things easier.